This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 161. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm so honored once again to spend this really precious time with you. How are you all doing? How are you all coping? I have to first start this episode by saying I had this epiphany the other day. I was at the grocery store. Everyone had on their masks. Everyone was busy shopping, head down, getting their things out of the way, moving out of the way for each other. And I had this moment of gratitude wave over me of how incredibly grateful I am, but how proud I am of everyone for just coping the way they are. I mean, even if your coping isn't so great right now, we're handling some really, really hard stuff. For those of you who live in California or America, we're still really struggling with COVID-19. And I just had this moment of going, wow, look at us. We're handling this. We're dealing with it, even though it's hard, even though it's painful, even though it's triggering. We are getting through this. And I just wanted to share that with you because it was an epiphany for me. You know, I think sometimes we just look at how hard it is and we forget to celebrate our ability to cope. And, you know, I think we're coping way better than we thought we could have. That being said, today we're talking about guilt. Now, this is an episode that really came out of a conversation I had with a client, and then I went on to really explore on my own during my break from doing the podcast each week. And this is where I landed, and I wanted to sort of throw this out at you. Just because you feel guilty doesn't mean you did something wrong. So I'll say it again. When you feel guilty about something, that guilt is not evidence that you have done something wrong. Sometimes I think what we do is when we feel the emotion of guilt, we assume that that guilt automatically means we've done something wrong and therefore we must be punished. That these are it's just a calculation. Guilt is the result of doing something wrong and therefore the consequence is you must be punished, you must be beaten, you must be criticized, you must be condemned. And then you go down a path of really, really being hard on yourself. But here is how I want you to think about guilt. Guilt is a very important emotion. I want you to think of guilt like an intersection. So you come up to the intersection and the stop sign, actually, instead of saying stop, it says guilt. And that's the presence or the arrival of your guilty feeling. And then I want you to think about, yes, you could make the assumption, you could choose the narrative that you've done something wrong and therefore you take this one road that takes you down a road of, you know, maybe troubleshooting the problem and looking at the problem and fixing the problem or, you know, hopefully not beating yourself up over this problem. But there is another option for you. There is, at this intersection, there's also another direction, which is where you can just acknowledge that guilt has shown up just to get you to do a check-in, right? That's what guilt is. It is a check-in. It's an opportunity for you to check in and say, hey, is this something that lines up with my values? Is this real? Like I said, is it actually evident that I did something wrong? Is there a chance that maybe my brain made a mistake here and has set off the guilt alarm without there actually being a problem? You know, sometimes our brain sets off anxiety alarms when there's no danger. Sometimes our brain sets off panic alarms when there's no catastrophe, and sometimes guilt can be the same. And so this stop sign, but it's a guilt sign, is really just there as a reminder, as an opportunity to check in and go, hey, how you doing? Now, if the guilt, there's no evidence that you did anything wrong and it's maybe a glitch in the system, you can proceed down your normal street and practice compassion and practice mindfulness and willingness and all your mindfulness tools, allowing the feeling of guilt to be there. That is an option. Just because you have guilt doesn't mean you have to stop everything, pull over, get out of the car, do a complete analysis of yourself and your intentions and who you are. You don't have to stop the car and pull over and get out and do that. You can choose to acknowledge and move on. Now, if there was a situation where, yes, you did make a mistake or yes, something went wrong, there is then an opportunity to, yes, pull over and address the problem and come up with solutions so it doesn't happen in the future. But here's the thing to remember here is, even if there was something that you did that you're not proud of or so forth, does not mean you get to beat yourself up. That is completely ineffective. It does not help. It does not motivate you not to do it again. It doesn't help you not to make accidents. It doesn't prevent you from being imperfect. The beat up does nothing. So try to catch yourself there around guilt and how often guilt leads to a big punishment party, a self-punishment party. But it's not a fun party. It's kind of the party that nobody ever wants to go to. Now, in addition to that, for those of you who have anxiety, OCD, health anxiety, some kind of anxiety disorder or even depression, sometimes your brain can convince you you've done something wrong, and we actually don't have any evidence of that. Now, if you're finding that you come to that stop sign, that intersection quite a lot, the trick here is to recognize patterns. If there is a pattern in your life where guilt is consistently showing up around a certain topic and it keeps hijacking your life and you keep going down the road of pulling over, getting out, analyzing, saying sorry to everyone, trying to fix the problem, only to have, feel like you're stuck in that cycle, we may actually want to look at whether that pulling over and analysis and apologies is actually a compulsion. It's very possible that guilt can be an intrusive feeling, that we call it an obsession, right? Guilt can be an obsession. It shows up, it's intrusive, it's repetitive, it often is inappropriate or unreasonable or not rational, and it keeps you locked in a cycle where you feel like you constantly have to make amends and constantly have to make up for or punish yourself for this so-called error. So each of these examples that I've given, I want you, as you pull up to the intersection where guilt has shown up, I want you to recognize it simply as it is, which is it's a feeling. Just because we have them doesn't make them true. And check in. Here's a question that I'll have you ask yourself. Is there anything I could do right now that it would be effective in preventing this from happening again? And I really will say that again. What can I do that would be effective at preventing this? Because the reason I say that is we can do a lot of ineffective things that won't prevent it. The truth is, let's say I accidentally rear-end another car, there's not a lot I can do to prevent that effectively. I could do a lot of ineffective things. I could beat myself up. I could ruminate. I could review all of the possible scenarios and go over whether that could happen again. Not a ton of that is really going to be effective. And so if it's not effective, I'm actually probably going to skip that stage and go back onto the road and live my life and just recognize that guilt showed up. And I'm going to allow it to be there while I keep driving in this metaphorical situation. If it's not effective, try not to do it. If it doesn't bear a ton of fruit for you, try not to do it. To be honest, a lot of the time we feel guilt, there isn't really a solution to it. There may be, let's say you've said something, you hurt somebody or you accidentally kick somebody or so forth. yeah, that you might want to apologize. That's helpful. But again, if you find that you're having guilt and you're repetitively apologizing, again, you might be caught in a little loop there. So let's return back to the main point here, which is just because you feel guilt does not necessarily mean you did something wrong. A lot of us have a little glitch in the guilt system, and guilt gets fired off a little bit too often and a little bit too easily at times where maybe guilt isn't really that appropriate. And guilt's just an emotion that comes up for us when there is an opportunity for growth. But that doesn't mean that just because it showed up that we have to lean in and analyze it and review it and correct it and prevent it in the future, right? So there's a little bit about guilt. It's painful. It's not very fun. It can make us feel bad about ourselves. But you have a choice. When you pull up and you slow down for that stop sign, that guilt intersection, you actually have a choice where you take the road where you don't beat yourself up and you don't spend a lot of time doing sort of ineffective behaviors to prevent things that were an accident to start with, or in situations where guilt just showed up for no reason at all, or for reasons that we are not completely sure about. Okay? Go gentle, guys. Go easy. Be compassionate. Give yourself some space to make mistakes. Give yourself space to be imperfect. Give yourself permission to show up in relationships imperfect. This is beautiful stuff right here. Powerful stuff. Important stuff. And all stuff that you're deserving of. Okay? I love you all. Short and sweet today, but, if I can throw lots of punches in a short amount of time and get the point across, that makes me really, really happy. I love you guys. Have a wonderful day. It is a beautiful day to do the hard thing, which includes managing your guilt. I'm here with you. Let's do it together, and I'll see you next week. Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.